The conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon in late September during our weekly family video call. The kind of call my sister Diane and I had been doing religiously every week for the past 2 years ever since our mother had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia at the age of 73. We'd set up a routine where Diane, who lived in Phoenix near our mother, would call me in Boston, and we'd discuss Mom's care and her declining condition and what needed to be done. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. The autumn sunlight was streaming through the windows, and I could hear my husband mowing the lawn outside. It was one of those peaceful Sunday moments that feels safe and domestic and completely ordinary. And I had no idea that the conversation I was about to have would reveal a nightmare that had been unfolding for 8 months, while I sent money and trusted my sister to do the right thing. My name is Rita Patterson, and I'm 48 years old, and I work as a hospital administrator in Boston. I've spent my entire career in healthcare management, so I understand medical facilities and standards of care and patient rights. And I trusted that my younger sister, Diane, who's 43, would make good decisions about our mother's care, because Diane had always been the one who lived close to Mom. The one who had Sunday dinners with her and helped her with doctor's appointments and knew her daily routines. I lived across the country and could only visit a few times a year or so when Mom's dementia got bad enough that she needed full-time care. I'd agreed that Diane should have power of attorney and make the day-to-day decisions while I helped financially. That decision turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. Diane's face appeared on my screen looking tired and stressed. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup, which was unusual for her. She was in her living room, and I could see her husband Greg in the background watching football. We exchanged our usual pleasantries. "How was your week? How are the kids?" The standard sister small talk. And then Diane's expression shifted to something more serious, and she said, "Rita, we need to talk about Mom. Her health has really declined in the past month. The memory care unit at her current facility isn't equipped to handle her anymore." And I felt my stomach drop because I'd been dreading this conversation. Mom had been in an assisted living place for the past 1.5 years, and I knew eventually she'd need more intensive care. But I'd hoped we had more time. I said, "Okay, what are the options?" And Diane pulled out some brochures that she held up to the camera. She said, "I've been researching memory care facilities, and I found this amazing place called Sunrise Senior Living. It's specifically designed for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. They have a secure unit so Mom can't wander. They have activities and therapy, and really high staff-to-patient ratios." She showed me glossy photos of beautiful rooms with warm lighting and comfortable furniture. Pictures of smiling elderly people doing art projects and gardening. Images of spacious dining rooms and outdoor courtyards. It looked like a resort, not a nursing home. I said, "It looks wonderful, but I'm guessing it's expensive." And Diane nodded and said, "Yes, it's $8,000 a month. But Mom's pension is $4,500, and her Social Security is another $1,800, so that's $6,300 covered. We'd need to come up with the additional $1,700 between us." I did some quick mental math. I said, "So you want me to contribute $850 a month, and you'll do the same?" And Diane said, "Actually, I was thinking, since you make more than me, and since I'm the one here doing all the physical caregiving and managing everything, maybe you could cover the full $1,700. I hesitated because that was a significant amount of money on top of what I was already contributing to various family expenses. But Diane said, "Rita, Mom needs this. She's not safe where she is anymore. They found her trying to leave the building 3 times last week. She's confused and scared, and she needs specialized memory care. Don't you want what's best for her?" And of course, when she put it like that, I couldn't say no. I said, "Okay, I'll cover the $1,700. When does she need to move in?" Diane said they have an opening next week. "I'm going to start the process tomorrow. I'll need you to wire me the first month's payment so I can secure the spot." I wired Diane $1,700 the next day, and every month after that for the next 8 months. I sent the money on the first of each month like clockwork. Diane would send me updates about Mom. She'd say Mom's adjusting well to Sunrise. She really likes the art therapy program. Or the staff at Sunrise threw Mom a birthday party. She was so happy. Or Mom made a friend at Sunrise. Another woman with dementia. They sit together at meals. The updates were always positive and reassuring. and they came with occasional photos that Diane said she'd taken during her visits. Photos of Mom sitting in what looked like a nice common room. Photos of Mom with craft projects. Photos of Mom with food that looked decent. I'd try to video call Mom directly, but Diane said the facility discouraged that because it confused the residents and made them agitated. She said it was better if I just visited in person when I could. I'd flown out to Phoenix twice in those 8 months, but both times something had come up. The first time Diane said Mom had pneumonia and wasn't allowed visitors. The second time Diane said there was a COVID scare at the facility, and they were on lockdown. Both times I'd stayed with Diane and Greg and spent time with my nieces, but I hadn't actually seen Mom. It was now May, 8 months since Mom had moved into Sunrise Senior Living. 8 months of me sending $1,700 a month, which totaled $13,600. And I decided I needed to see Mom. My daughter was graduating from college, and I wanted Mom to be there even though I knew she probably wouldn't remember it or understand what was happening. But she was still my mother, and I wanted her there. I called Diane and said I'm thinking of bringing Mom to Boston for Emma's graduation. It's in 2 weeks. Do you think the facility would allow her to travel? And Diane immediately said no. Absolutely not. Mom's condition is too fragile. She can't handle travel. She gets confused in new environments. It would be cruel to put her through that. I said, okay, well then I'll come to Phoenix the week before graduation and visit her and take some photos to show Emma. And Diane said, actually, that week is really bad. I have a work thing and I won't be able to coordinate the visit. And I said, Diane, I don't need you there. I'll just go to Sunrise myself and visit Mom. And there was this long pause, and then Diane said the facility has strict visitor policies. You need to be on the approved list, and we'd have to submit paperwork in advance. It takes at least 2 weeks. I felt my frustration building, and I said, well then, put me on the approved list. I'm her daughter. Why wouldn't I be approved? And Diane said, I'll look into it. But I really don't think bringing Mom out for a graduation is a good idea, Rita. You need to accept that Mom is declining, and these big events are too overwhelming for her. Something about the conversation bothered me. Diane had been putting me off from seeing Mom for 8 months, and there always seemed to be a reason why it wasn't a good time. I understood that memory care facilities had rules, and that Mom's health was fragile, but this felt like more than that. This felt like Diane was actively preventing me from visiting. I talked to my husband Paul about it that night, and he said, why don't you just show up? Don't tell Diane you're coming. Fly out there and go directly to the facility. You're Mom's daughter. They can't refuse to let you see her. I said that feels sneaky, like I don't trust Diane. And Paul said, Rita, do you trust Diane? And I realized I didn't have a good answer. I trusted that Diane loved Mom and wanted what was best for her. But I didn't trust the way Diane was controlling all access to Mom, the way she'd been putting me off for months, the way she got defensive whenever I suggested visiting. Paul said you've sent her over $13,000, and you haven't seen your mother in almost a year. I think showing up unannounced is completely reasonable. I booked a flight to Phoenix for the following Saturday. I didn't tell Diane I was coming. I looked up the address for Sunrise Senior Living that Diane had given me months ago when Mom first moved in. It was on the northern edge of Phoenix in an area I wasn't familiar with. I arranged a rental car and planned to drive straight from the airport to the facility. I'd surprise Mom with a visit and maybe take her out for lunch if she was having a good day. I felt nervous about going behind Diane's back, but I also felt like I had a right to see my own mother. The flight was early morning, and I landed in Phoenix around 11 a.m. local time. The desert heat hit me as soon as I stepped outside to get my rental car. It was already in the mid-90s, and the sky was that bright cloudless blue that you only get in Arizona. I programmed the address into my GPS and started driving. The route took me through some decent neighborhoods, and then started getting more rundown. The buildings were older. The streets were more littered. I saw a lot of check-cashing places and liquor stores and auto repair shops. This didn't look like the kind of area where an $8,000 a month luxury memory care facility would be located. The GPS told me I was approaching my destination, and I slowed down looking for the building. What I saw made me slam on my brakes so hard the car behind me honked. The address Diane had given me led to a 3-story concrete building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Several windows were boarded up. The paint was peeling. There was graffiti on the side walls. The parking lot was cracked and full of potholes. There was absolutely no signage indicating this was Sunrise Senior Living or any kind of care facility. I sat in my car staring at the building thinking I must have the wrong address. I pulled out my phone and checked the email Diane had sent me 8 months ago with the facility information. The address matched. I looked up Sunrise Senior Living online and found a website with those same glossy photos Diane had shown me. But the address on the website was different. It was in Scottsdale, which was a much wealthier area. This building I was looking at was not Sunrise Senior Living. This was something else entirely. My hands were shaking as I parked my car and got out. I walked up to the building's entrance, which was a heavy metal door with a buzzer system. There was a small plaque next to the door that said Desert Valley Care Home. I'd never heard Diane mention that name. I pressed the buzzer and waited. After a moment, a tired-looking woman's voice came through the speaker saying yes. I said I'm here to visit my mother. And the woman said name. I said Dorothy Patterson. There was a pause and some clicking sounds like she was checking a computer. And then she said room 214. I'll buzz you in. The door made a loud clicking sound and I pulled it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. It was that unmistakable nursing home smell of disinfectant trying to cover up urine and unwashed bodies. The floor was dingy linoleum. The walls were institutional beige. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered. This was not a luxury facility. This was not even a decent facility. This looked like the kind of place that charged $400 a month for welfare patients. I walked down the hallway looking for room 214. I passed several open doors, and what I saw in those rooms made me feel sick. Elderly people sitting in wheelchairs staring at nothing. Rooms with 4 and 5 beds crammed together. Televisions blaring. Staff members who barely looked at me as I passed. I found room 214 and stopped in the doorway. There were 6 beds in the room, 6 elderly women in various states of decline, and in the bed by the window was my mother. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost so much weight. Her hair, which had always been neatly styled, was thin and unkempt. She was wearing a hospital gown that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. She was staring at the wall and she didn't notice me standing there. I walked into the room and said, "Mom." She turned her head slowly and looked at me with no recognition in her eyes. I said, "Mom, it's me, it's Rita." And she blinked and said, "Who?" I pulled a chair over to her bedside and sat down and took her hand. Her skin felt papery and dry. I said, "I'm your daughter, Rita. I came to visit you." And she looked at me for a long moment and then said, "I want to go home." I spent about 20 minutes with Mom trying to get her to eat some of the lunch that had been brought to her room. It was some kind of gray meat and overcooked vegetables on a plastic tray. She barely touched it. I asked her how she was feeling, and she seemed confused and kept asking where she was and when she could leave. I asked her about the staff and whether they were taking good care of her, and she said they never come. I ring the bell and they don't come. I looked around the room and saw the call button hanging from her bed rail. I tested it and heard it buzz faintly somewhere down the hall, but no one came. I sat there for 5 more minutes and still no staff member appeared. I was furious and horrified, and trying to process what I was seeing. My mother, who I'd been told, was in a beautiful specialized memory care facility with art therapy and activities, and high staff ratios, was actually in this warehouse of human suffering. This barely functional institution that reeked of neglect. I left Mom's room and found the front desk where the woman who'd buzzed me in was sitting. She was in her 60s, heavyset, eating a sandwich while watching a small television. I said, "Excuse me. I need to speak to whoever is in charge here," and she said administrators not in on weekends. I said then I need to speak to the charge nurse or whoever is supervising today. She sighed and picked up a phone and paged someone. A few minutes later, a tired-looking woman in scrubs appeared and said, "I'm Nurse Janet. Can I help you?" I said yes. "I'm Rita Patterson. My mother is Dorothy Patterson in room 214. And I need to understand what's going on here because I was told my mother was at a facility called Sunrise Senior Living, and clearly she's not." Nurse Janet looked confused and said, "I don't know anything about that. Your mother's been here at Desert Valley for about 8 months. She was admitted by her daughter Diane, who has medical power of attorney." I said, "And how much does this facility cost per month?" And Nurse Janet said I'd have to check with administration, but I think it's around $400 for a shared room. $400. I'd been sending Diane $1,700 a month on top of Mom's pension and Social Security. That meant Mom's care should have cost $6,300 a month. If this place only cost $400 then, where was the other $5,800 going? I did the math quickly in my head. 8 months times $5,800 was $46,400. Diane had pocketed $46,000 while Mom was warehoused in this horrible place. I felt rage building in my chest. I asked Nurse Janet if I could see Mom's medical records, and she said I'd need medical power of attorney for that. I said my sister has that, but I'm listed as the secondary contact. She said she'd need to verify that and asked for my ID. I showed her my license, and she went to check her files. While I waited, I looked around the lobby area. There was a bulletin board with state inspection reports posted. I walked over and read them. The facility had multiple code violations: insufficient staffing, improper medication storage, failure to maintain adequate temperatures, inadequate nutrition standards. They'd been fined multiple times and were on probation with the state health department. Nurse Janet came back and said, yes, you're listed as secondary contact, so I can give you copies of the records. It'll take about 20 minutes to print everything. I said that's fine, I'll wait. While she was preparing the files, I called my husband and told him what I'd found. Paul was horrified. He said, you need to call the police. This is elder abuse. This is financial exploitation. I said, I know. I'm getting Mom's medical records, and then I'm going to remove her from this place and figure out what to do about Diane. Paul said, be careful. If Diane has medical POA, she might be able to block you. I said, I don't care. I'm not leaving Mom here another day. Nurse Janet came back with a thick folder of medical records. I sat down in the lobby and started reading through them. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Mom had been admitted to Desert Valley 8 months ago with a note from Diane stating that she wanted minimal care, comfort measures only. The facility had documented that Mom was malnourished when she arrived. They'd noted multiple times that she needed more food and better nutrition, but there were no orders to address it. There were incident reports showing that Mom had fallen twice and had pressure sores from lying in bed too long. There were notes from staff requesting orders for physical therapy or better wound care, but no follow-up from the doctor. The medical records showed that Diane had visited Mom exactly 3 times in 8 months. The last visit was 4 months ago. There were notes from social workers trying to contact Diane about Mom's declining condition, but Diane hadn't returned their calls. The records showed that Mom's medications had been reduced to save money. She wasn't getting the dementia medications she'd been on before. She wasn't getting proper vitamins or supplements. They were giving her the bare minimum to keep her alive. I photocopied everything, and then I asked Nurse Janet, who I needed to talk to, about removing my mother from this facility. She said I'd need to contact the administrator on Monday and fill out discharge paperwork. But if I had concerns about the care, I could contact Adult Protective Services. I said I'm doing both. I'm filing a complaint with APS, and I'm removing my mother from this facility immediately. Nurse Janet looked uncomfortable and said, I can't stop you, but you'll need to sign some liability waivers. I spent the next hour on the phone making arrangements. I called Adult Protective Services and filed an emergency complaint about elder abuse and neglect. I gave them all the information about the facility and about Diane's financial exploitation. They said they'd send an investigator out immediately, and they'd also contact the police. I called the hospital where I work in Boston and spoke to a colleague who connected me with a geriatric specialist in Phoenix who agreed to see Mom on an emergency basis. I called a private ambulance service and arranged transport. I called a lawyer who specialized in elder law and left a message about needing immediate legal representation. And then I went back to Mom's room and started packing up her belongings, which didn't take long because she barely had anything, a few changes of clothes. Some old slippers, a photo of me and Diane from 20 years ago. The APS investigator arrived about 2 hours later. Her name was Carmen Rodriguez, and she was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen everything. She inspected Mom's room. She interviewed the staff. She photographed the conditions. She reviewed the medical records I'd shown her. She said this facility is already on our watch list for violations. We've been trying to get them shut down for months, but they keep appealing. Your mother should never have been placed here. This is not appropriate for someone with dementia who needs specialized care. I said my sister has power of attorney, and she told me Mom was at a completely different facility. Carmen said that's financial exploitation and it's a crime. We're going to investigate your sister. And if what you're telling me is true, she'll face criminal charges. I gave Carmen all the documentation I had. The emails from Diane about Sunrise Senior Living. The bank transfers showing I'd sent money every month. Carmen said we'll need to interview your sister. Does she know you're here? I said no. And I'd like to keep it that way until I get my mother somewhere safe. The ambulance arrived around 5 p.m., and the paramedics carefully moved Mom onto a stretcher. She was confused and kept asking what was happening. I held her hand and said, "It's okay, Mom. We're taking you to a better place. You're going to be safe." We transported Mom to a hospital where the geriatric specialist met us. Dr. Sarah Chen examined Mom and was appalled by her condition. She said your mother is severely malnourished. She has infected pressure sores. She shows signs of dehydration and vitamin deficiency. She's been neglected in a medical sense. We need to admit her for at least a few days to stabilize her condition and treat these infections. I said do whatever she needs. Money is not an issue. Dr. Chen said I'm also going to order new brain scans because I want to see if her dementia has progressed or if some of her cognitive decline is actually from malnutrition and lack of proper medication. It's possible that with proper care she might improve somewhat. While Mom was being admitted, I finally called Diane. It was about 7 p.m. Phoenix time. Diane answered, sounding cheerful, and said, "Rita." "What's up?" I said, "I'm in Phoenix. I visited Mom today." There was dead silence, and then Diane said, "What? You're here. Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I wanted to see where Mom was actually living, Diane. I went to the address you gave me for Sunrise Senior Living." And Diane's tone changed immediately. She said, "Rita, I can explain." And I said you put Mom in a welfare nursing home that costs $400 a month, while I sent you $1,700 a month thinking she was in a luxury facility. You stole almost $50,000, Diane. You committed elder abuse and fraud. And Diane started crying, saying it's not like that. I needed the money. I have bills. Greg lost his job and we were going to lose the house. I was going to pay it back. I said pay it back. Our mother is malnourished and covered in bed sores. She has infections from lying in her own waste. You didn't just steal money, Diane, you tortured her. You let her suffer in that horrible place so you could keep your house. Diane was sobbing now, saying I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I thought she'd be okay there. They said they'd take care of her. And I said you visited her 3 times in 8 months, Diane. 3 times. If you'd actually gone to see her, you would have known how bad it was, but you didn't want to know because then you'd have to face what you were doing. Diane said, "Please don't report me. Please, Rita. I'll fix this. I'll pay everything back." I said it's too late. Adult Protective Services is already investigating you. The police are going to be involved, and I've contacted a lawyer about removing your power of attorney. Diane started screaming at me, saying you can't do that. You have no right. I'm Mom's daughter too. And I said you lost that right when you chose money over Mom's well-being. I hung up on her and blocked her number because I couldn't stand to hear her voice anymore. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Mom was in the hospital being treated for her infections and malnutrition. Dr. Chen said she was responding well to IV fluids and proper nutrition. The pressure sores were being cleaned and treated. Mom was getting physical therapy to rebuild some of her strength. I stayed in Phoenix and visited Mom every day. Sometimes she recognized me, and sometimes she didn't, but there were moments of clarity where she seemed more like herself. She asked me once why she was in the hospital, and I told her she'd been sick, but she was getting better. She asked where Diane was, and I said Diane couldn't visit right now. Mom seemed to accept this and didn't ask again. Dr. Chen did the new brain scans and said while Mom definitely had dementia, there was evidence that some of her cognitive decline had been exacerbated by malnutrition and lack of proper medication. She said with proper care and nutrition, Mom might regain some function. Not a lot, but some. Adult Protective Services completed their investigation quickly. Carmen Rodriguez told me that Diane had admitted to everything when they interviewed her. She'd confessed to placing Mom in Desert Valley instead of Sunrise. She'd confessed to pocketing the difference in costs. She'd confessed to not visiting Mom regularly because she felt guilty and didn't want to face what she'd done. Carmen said the total amount Diane had stolen was actually higher than I'd calculated because she'd also been taking money directly from Mom's pension account. Diane had convinced Mom to sign over access to her pension before the dementia got too bad, and Diane had been draining that account for almost 2 years. The total theft was over $80,000. Carmen said the state was filing criminal charges, elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud. Diane was facing up to 15 years in prison. I hired a lawyer named Michael Torres who specialized in elder law and guardianship cases. I explained the situation and showed him all the documentation. He said we needed to file an emergency petition to remove Diane's power of attorney and have me appointed as Mom's legal guardian. He said given the evidence of abuse and exploitation, a judge would almost certainly grant this. We filed the petition on a Tuesday and had a hearing on Thursday. Diane showed up with a public defender who tried to argue that Diane had made mistakes, but she loved her mother and deserved another chance. The judge was not sympathetic. He said you placed your mother in a facility you knew was substandard. You stole tens of thousands of dollars meant for her care. You visited her 3 times in 8 months. You ignored medical recommendations. This is not a mistake, this is deliberate abuse and exploitation. He granted my petition immediately. I was now Mom's legal guardian with full medical and financial power of attorney. Diane was ordered to have no contact with Mom and to pay full restitution. The criminal case against Diane moved forward. The district attorney said they had an airtight case with Diane's confession and all the documentation. They offered Diane a plea deal. Plead guilty to reduced charges and get 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3, or go to trial and risk the full 15 years. Diane's lawyer advised her to take the deal. Diane accepted it. She pleaded guilty in court and was sentenced to 5 years. I attended the sentencing, and when the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood up and said, "Your Honor, my sister stole from our mother, but more than that, she stole our mother's dignity. She let her suffer in terrible conditions. She prioritized money over basic human decency. 5 years doesn't seem like enough for what she did, but I hope it's enough time for her to understand the severity of her actions." The judge nodded and said, "Ms. Patterson, I agree with you." This was a particularly egregious case of elder abuse. He added additional requirements to Diane's sentence: mandatory financial literacy classes, mandatory therapy, and a lifetime ban on ever serving as a power of attorney for any vulnerable person. I had to figure out what to do about Mom's long-term care. Dr. Chen said Mom needed a proper memory care facility, not a nursing home, but a real specialized dementia care center with trained staff and appropriate activities. I researched facilities in Phoenix and found one called Silverado Memory Care that had excellent reviews and proper licensing and a good reputation. It was expensive, $9,500 a month. But I could afford it with Mom's pension and Social Security and my contributions. More importantly, it was a place where Mom would actually receive care. I toured the facility and was impressed. It was clean and bright. The staff seemed genuinely caring. There were activities and therapy programs. The rooms were private and comfortable. I moved Mom in after she was discharged from the hospital, and she seemed to adjust well. The staff at Silverado told me that with proper nutrition and medication and care, they'd seen patients like Mom stabilize and even improve slightly. And they were right. Over the next few months, Mom did improve. She gained weight. Her infections healed. She became more alert and engaged. She started participating in some activities like music therapy and gentle exercise. I had to deal with the financial aftermath of Diane's theft. My lawyer helped me file claims to try to recover the money Diane had stolen. We went after Diane's assets. We put a lien on her house. We garnished her accounts. We managed to recover about $35,000, which I put into a trust fund for Mom's care. The remaining $45,000 was likely gone forever since Diane had spent it on bills and living expenses. I also had to notify all of Mom's financial institutions about the fraud and get new accounts set up with proper safeguards. It was months of paperwork and phone calls and documentation, but I wanted to make sure Mom's money was protected going forward. I set up a special needs trust that would ensure Mom's pension and Social Security could only be used for her direct care with oversight from the trust attorney. My relationship with Diane was obviously destroyed. She sent me letters from prison trying to apologize, saying she was sorry and she never meant for things to get so bad, saying she loved Mom and loved me and hoped someday we could reconcile. I didn't respond to any of the letters. I couldn't forgive what she'd done. The pain she'd caused Mom, the betrayal of trust, the months of suffering that Mom had endured in that terrible place. Every time I thought about Mom sitting in that room with 5 other patients, malnourished and confused and alone, I felt rage toward Deanne. My parents had raised us to take care of each other and take care of them as they aged, and Diane had violated that in the worst possible way. My husband Paul said I should consider therapy to work through my anger because holding on to it wasn't healthy, but I said I wasn't ready to let it go. The anger felt justified and righteous, and I wanted to hold on to it. Mom's care at Silverado was everything I'd hoped for. The staff really did care about their residents. They treated Mom with dignity and respect. They helped her with bathing and dressing. They made sure she ate nutritious meals. They gave her medications on schedule. They engaged her in activities that were appropriate for her cognitive level. I visited as often as I could, flying out from Boston once a month for long weekends. During my visits, I'd take Mom on walks around the facility's garden. We'd look at old photo albums together, even though she usually didn't remember the people in the photos. Sometimes we'd just sit quietly, and I'd hold her hand. There were moments of real connection even through the dementia. Moments where Mom would look at me and smile, and say something that showed she knew who I was, and that she appreciated me being there. Those moments made all the stress and expense and heartbreak worth it. Other families at Silverado became a support system for me. There was a family support group that met monthly, and I started attending when I was in town. Hearing other people's stories about caring for parents with dementia helped me feel less alone. There was one woman named Margaret whose mother had also been in a terrible facility before Margaret discovered it and moved her to Silverado. Margaret and I became friends. We'd talk about the guilt we felt for not discovering the abuse sooner, the anger at family members who'd let us down, the grief of watching our mothers decline. Margaret said something that stuck with me. She said we can't change the past, but we can make sure the present and future are better. We can give our mothers the care and dignity they deserve for whatever time they have left. And that became my focus, making Mom's remaining time as good as possible. I also became an advocate for other families dealing with elder care. I started speaking at conferences about the warning signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. I partnered with Adult Protective Services to create educational materials about choosing care facilities and monitoring care. I worked with legislators to push for stronger oversight of nursing homes and stricter penalties for elder abuse. I turned my anger and pain into something productive, into a mission to prevent what happened to Mom from happening to other vulnerable seniors. Carmen Rodriguez from APS became a colleague and friend. She said people like me, who'd experienced the system failures firsthand, were the most effective advocates because we understood what was at stake. Mom lived at Silverado for 3 more years before she passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 76. By the end, she didn't recognize anyone and couldn't speak, and spent most of her time sleeping, but she was clean and comfortable and pain-free, and surrounded by caring staff who treated her gently. I was with her when she died. I'd flown out because the staff had called to say she was declining, and I'd sat with her for 2 days holding her hand and telling her I loved her. When she took her last breath, I felt both grief and relief. Grief for losing my mother, but relief that she was no longer trapped in the confusion and fear of dementia. Relief that her suffering was over. The staff at Silverado gave me time alone with her body. They brought me tea and sat with me while I cried. They told me stories about Mom, little things she'd done or said that had made them smile. They said she'd been loved there and well cared for, and I believed them because I'd seen it myself. Diane was still in prison when Mom died. She had 2 more years left on her sentence. I debated whether to tell her, and finally decided she had a right to know even though she'd forfeited the right to participate in Mom's life. I sent her a brief letter saying Mom had passed away peacefully. Services would be private, no response needed. Diane sent back a long letter about how sorry she was, and how guilty she felt, and how she wished she could go back and make different choices. She said losing Mom without getting to say goodbye was the hardest thing she'd ever experienced, and she understood it was what she deserved. I read the letter once and then filed it away. I still couldn't forgive her, but I also couldn't hold onto the rage anymore. I was too tired, and Mom was gone, and the anger had nowhere to go. I decided that, when Diane got out of prison, I wouldn't seek her out, but if she tried to contact me, I'd consider responding. Not for her sake, but for mine, because carrying hatred for the rest of my life seemed like letting her win. The total cost of Mom's care at Silverado for 3 years was over $300,000. Insurance covered very little. Medicare covered almost nothing for long-term memory care. Mom's pension and Social Security covered about half, and I covered the rest from my savings and current income. It was financially devastating. I had to delay my own retirement. I had to cut back on other expenses. I had to take out a home equity loan at one point to cover costs. But I never regretted a single dollar spent because I knew Mom was getting good care, because I could visit her and see that she was clean and fed and treated with dignity, because I could sleep at night knowing she wasn't suffering. That knowledge was worth any amount of money. Paul supported me completely, even though it meant we made significant financial sacrifices as a couple. He said, "Your mother deserves this, and you deserve peace of mind. We'll figure out the money." Looking back on the whole nightmare, I learned some hard lessons. I learned that you can't trust family members just because they're family, that people will do terrible things when they're desperate or selfish, that elder abuse is more common than most people realize, and it often happens at the hands of the people who are supposed to be caregivers. I learned that power of attorney is a sacred trust that should only be given to someone who will truly put the vulnerable person's interests first. I learned that you have to verify and monitor care even when it's inconvenient, even when family members get offended, even when you live across the country. I learned that unannounced visits can save lives because people behave differently when they know they're being watched. I learned that the healthcare system has massive gaps in oversight, and that nursing homes can get away with horrific conditions because there aren't enough inspectors and penalties aren't severe enough. I also learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could handle crisis and advocacy and conflict, that I could stand up to my sister and the legal system and the healthcare bureaucracy, that I could be Mom's voice when she couldn't speak for herself. I learned that doing the right thing is often expensive and exhausting and thankless, but it's still worth doing. I learned that justice is sometimes possible, but it's never enough to undo the harm that was done. Diane went to prison, but that didn't give Mom back the 8 months she suffered in Desert Valley. The restitution I recovered didn't heal the pressure sores or the infections or the fear Mom must have felt alone in that terrible place. Nothing could undo that damage. All I could do was make sure the rest of Mom's life was better. My sister put our mom in what she claimed was the best facility while taking her pension. She showed me brochures of Sunrise Senior Living with its beautiful rooms and activities, and promised care for $8,000 a month. I sent money every month to help cover the costs, trusting that Mom was safe and well cared for. 6 months later, I visited Unannounced, and the address led me to a condemned building housing a welfare nursing home where Mom was malnourished and neglected in a room with 5 other patients. The facility cost $400 a month, and my sister had pocketed the difference. Over $80,000 total stolen while Mom suffered. I called Adult Protective Services and the police. I removed my sister's power of attorney. I moved Mom to a real memory care facility where she received proper care for the last 3 years of her life. My sister pleaded guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation and is serving 5 years in prison. She lost her house and her family and her freedom because she chose money over our mother's well-being. And I lost my sister because I could never forgive her for what she did. Some betrayals are too deep to heal from, and this was one of them. All I could do was make sure Mom's final years were filled with dignity and proper care. Make sure she didn't die alone in that terrible place. Make sure that someone was fighting for her even when she couldn't fight for herself. That's what family is supposed to do. Protect the vulnerable and speak for those who can't speak. My sister forgot that, and it cost her everything while our mother paid the price in suffering that should never have happened. I'll carry the guilt of not discovering it sooner for the rest of my life. The what-ifs that haunt me in quiet moments. What if I'd insisted on visiting earlier? What if I'd been more suspicious of Diane's excuses? What if I'd demanded proof that Mom was where she said she was? But I also know I did everything I could once I discovered the truth. I fought for Mom and got her the care she deserved. I made sure Diane faced consequences. I turned the experience into advocacy that's helped other families. And I was with Mom when she died peacefully after 3 years of proper care. That has to be enough because I can't change the past. I can only learn from it and try to prevent it from happening to others. That's the lesson I'm sharing by telling this story. Trust, but verify. Monitor care closely. Make surprise visits. Don't let distance or family pressure stop you from advocating for your loved ones. Because elder abuse happens in shadows and silence, and the only way to stop it is to shine light into those dark places and refuse to look away even when what you see is heartbreaking.